Never call 911 on someone for having a pool party in their own backyard, especially when you're an HOA president who doesn't even live in the neighborhood, and you're about to get a front row seat to the instant karma that's coming your way. HOAs often think they can control everything in their neighborhood, from the color of your front door to the number of guests you can have. But sometimes they get so power mad, they try to control people who don't even live in their community, not realizing they're about to make a fool of themselves in front of a police officer and get a taste of instant karma. My name is Mike Johnson, and I'm a 34-year-old software engineer. I live in a nice house on a large piece of property in a suburban area. My house isn't part of any HOA, which is exactly how I like it. I have a big backyard with a pool, and I love to have friends over for pool parties on weekends. One Saturday, I was hosting a pool party for my friends. About 20 people were there, including my wife, Sarah, our kids, and some of our closest friends. We were having a great time, grilling food, swimming, listening to music, and just enjoying each other's company. Around 4 p.m., I noticed a woman standing at the edge of my property, near the fence that separates my yard from the HOA community next door. She was watching us with a disapproving look on her face. I didn't think much of it at first. People sometimes stop to watch when there's a party going on. But then she started walking toward my house. She was a woman in her late 50s, wearing expensive-looking clothes and carrying a clipboard. She had a look on her face like she owned the place. "Excuse me," she called out. "Can I speak with the homeowner?" I walked over to her. "I'm the homeowner. Can I help you?" The woman looked me up and down. "I'm Karen Peterson, president of the Pine Ridge HOA. I need you to shut this party down immediately." I was confused. "I'm sorry, but I don't live in Pine Ridge. This is my property, and I'm not subject to your HOA rules." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "That's not true. This area is part of Pine Ridge, and we have rules about noise, parking, and the number of guests you can have. You're violating multiple rules right now." I shook my head. "No, I don't live in Pine Ridge. I live here, and this is my property. I'm not subject to your HOA rules." Karen pulled out a map from her clipboard. "See? This map clearly shows that your property is part of Pine Ridge." I looked at the map. It was a map of the area, but it was outdated. It showed the entire area as part of Pine Ridge, but that hadn't been true for years. When Pine Ridge was first developed, the developer had planned to include my property in the community, but he had run out of money and never bought the land from my grandfather. My grandfather had kept the land, and it had never been part of Pine Ridge. "This map is outdated," I said. "My property has never been part of Pine Ridge. I can show you the deed to prove it." Karen's face turned red. "I don't care about your deed. This area is part of Pine Ridge, and you're violating our rules. You need to shut this party down now, or I'll call the police." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're going to call the police on me for having a party in my own backyard? You're creating a disturbance." Karen yelled. "The music is too loud, there are too many people, and you're parking all over the street. This is unacceptable." "The music isn't loud. There are only 20 people here, and everyone parked in my driveway," I said, getting angry now. "You have no right to tell me what to do on my own property." Karen pulled out her phone. "I'm calling 911. We'll see what the police have to say about this." I just shook my head and walked away. I told my friends what was happening, and they couldn't believe it either. We continued with our party, keeping an eye on Karen, who was pacing at the edge of my property. About 10 minutes later, a police car pulled up. An officer got out and walked over to Karen. They talked for a moment, then the officer walked over to me. "Sir, I received a call about a disturbance," the officer said. "Is there a problem here?" "No, officer," I said. "I'm having a party in my backyard. This is my property, and I'm not breaking any laws." The officer nodded. "That's what I thought. But the woman over there claims that this property is part of Pine Ridge and that you're violating their HOA rules." "That's not true," I said. "I don't live in Pine Ridge, and my property has never been part of their community. I can show you my deed to prove it." The officer nodded. "That will be helpful." I went inside and got the deed to my property. When I showed it to the officer, he nodded. "This clearly shows that your property is not part of Pine Ridge. You're not subject to their HOA rules." The officer walked back to Karen and showed her the deed. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see Karen getting more and more agitated. Finally, the officer walked back to me. "She's not happy," he said. "She insists that the map she has is correct and that you're violating their rules." "The map is outdated," I said. "The developer never bought this land from my grandfather. It's never been part of Pine Ridge." The officer nodded. "I understand. I've explained that to her, but she's not listening. I'm going to ask her to leave. If she doesn't go, I'll have to charge her with trespassing." The officer walked back to Karen and spoke to her for a few minutes. She was clearly upset, but she finally turned and walked away. The officer came back to me. "She's leaving. I'm sorry for the disturbance." "No problem, officer," I said. "Thanks for your help." The officer left, and we continued our party. I thought that was the end of it. I should have known better. About an hour later, I noticed Karen back at the edge of my property. This time, she had two people with her, a man and another woman, both looking as angry as she was. They were pointing at my house and talking loudly. I went over to see what they wanted. Karen saw me coming and started yelling. "There he is. That's the one who's causing all the trouble." The man stepped forward. "I'm Karen's husband, Frank. We demand that you shut down this party immediately. You're violating our HOA rules." "I've already explained this to Karen," I said. "I don't live in Pine Ridge, and my property is not part of your community. I'm not subject to your rules." Frank pulled out the same outdated map that Karen had shown me. "This map clearly shows that your property is part of Pine Ridge. You have to follow our rules." "I've already shown that map to a police officer," I said. "He confirmed that it's outdated and that my property is not part of Pine Ridge. I've also shown him my deed, which proves that this land has never been part of Pine Ridge." Frank's face turned red. "I don't care about your deed. The map is what we go by, and it shows that you're part of Pine Ridge. You need to shut down this party now." "I'm not shutting down my party," I said. "I'm on my own property, and I'm not breaking any laws. If you don't leave, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing." The woman with Karen and Frank spoke up. "I'm a member of the HOA board. We have the right to enforce our rules, and you're violating them. You need to shut down this party now." "I'm not violating your rules because I'm not part of your HOA," I said, getting angry now. "I've shown you my deed, and a police officer has confirmed that I'm not part of Pine Ridge. If you don't leave, I will call the police and have you all removed for trespassing." Karen, Frank, and the other woman just stood there, glaring at me. I pulled out my phone and called the police. "Yes, I need to report trespassers on my property. I've already asked them to leave, but they're refusing." A few minutes later, the same officer who had responded earlier arrived. He talked to Karen, Frank, and the other woman, then came over to me. "They're refusing to leave," he said. "I'm going to have to ask them to leave, or I'll have to charge them with trespassing." The officer went back to Karen and the others and spoke to them for a few minutes. They were clearly upset, but they finally turned and walked away. The officer came back to me. "They're leaving. I'm sorry for the disturbance." "Thank you, officer," I said. The officer left, and we continued our party. Karen, Frank, and the other woman stood at the edge of my property for a while longer, but they finally left. The next day, I received a certified letter from the Pine Ridge HOA. It stated that I was in violation of multiple HOA rules and that I needed to pay $1,000 in fines or face legal action. I laughed when I read it. I called my lawyer, Bill, and told him what had happened. "This is ridiculous," Bill said. "They have no authority over your property. I'll send them a letter explaining that and warning them to leave you alone." Bill sent the letter, but the HOA ignored it. A week later, I received another letter, this one stating that the fines had increased to $5,000 and that the HOA would take legal action if I didn't pay. Bill and I decided to wait and see what they would do. A week later, I was served with a lawsuit from the HOA. They were suing me for $10,000 in fines and asking the court to force me to comply with their rules. Bill and I went to court, and the judge was shocked when he heard the story. "You're suing this man for having a party on his own property?" he asked the HOA's lawyer. The HOA lawyer showed the judge the outdated map and claimed that my property was part of Bill's community. Bill showed the judge the deed to my property, proving that it had never been part of Pine Ridge. The judge looked at the map, then at the deed, then back at the map. "This map is outdated," he said. The deed clearly shows that this property has never been part of Pine Ridge. The HOA has no authority over this property or the owner. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning the HOA could never sue me again for this issue. He also ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees. But we weren't done. We filed a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment, infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process. We also filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office, citing the HOA's abuse of power. The evidence against the HOA was overwhelming. We had the deed to my property, the outdated map, the police reports, and testimony from neighbors who had similar experiences with Karen. The HOA settled quickly, paying me $50,000 in damages and issuing a formal apology. The State Attorney General's office investigated the HOA and fined them $25,000 for abuse of power. Karen was removed as HOA president, and the new board sent me a formal apology. They also sent a letter to all homeowners, explaining the situation and promising to be more careful in the future. As for Karen, she became a pariah in the neighborhood. People would cross the street to avoid her, and she was forced to sell her house and move away. Last I heard, she was living in a small apartment in another city, working as a receptionist and trying to rebuild her life. The lesson? Be sure of your facts before you make accusations. When you try to control someone's property without any legal right, you not look foolish but also face real consequences. Because some of us know our rights, and we're not afraid to fight back when someone tries to take them away. Subscribe for more stories about HOAs getting what they deserve.